Welcome Bruce Whittington to share with us today. Edstart, another one of our partners who do wonderful work, enable us to do what we're called to do, but are doing fantastic work with schools. And as Bruce is going to share about, their model with Edstart brings technology together in a way that serves people rather than making it about the technology. But they've got some wonderful ways of helping optimise fee management. We heard Kay would mention that in his session about small changes that can make a large difference in the way that fees come into the school. And that certainly helps with family flexibility, but it also offers significant school returns. So would you welcome Bruce to come and share with us? Advance or there we go.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Dave.
Great, thank you, Bruce.
And thank you very much for having me, not just to come and share a few ideas, but also to participate in the sessions. That's very valuable. And this is something that we try and do as much as we can to, I guess, be a valuable part of the ecosystem by learning and giving back. And this sort of presentation, as far as possible, will not be a product presentation. The whole idea is we're trying to generate some ideas, generate some conversation. We've got a fairly limited space, so we're not going to come to many conclusions necessary, but the idea is that it maybe just sparks some thoughts that you might not otherwise have had. And there's also some nice synergies with what's already been discussed, actually. So the topic of revenue optimization, I realise, is a very broad one, because the word optimization suggests quality and quantity, and is probably, from a revenue generation perspective, about efficacy, but also efficiency. So that's already quite a broad area. But the agenda is, I'll tell you just a little bit about Edstart, so that gives it, I guess, some context, but even more immediately, some economic context, a big topic in recent days. A little bit on revenue optimization, and then fee management, maybe the idea of managing fees internally versus externally, and then I'll just make a few comments about how schools, from my experience, have gone about assessing how to manage fees, whether to do that internally or externally, or some sort of hybrid approach, and then how they've tried to both project ROI, but then also measure ROI of that partnership, and the sort of principles that might be able to be applied across other third-party relationships. So just very briefly about Edstart, probably as important how we do things rather than just what we do. And what I mean by that is the culture behind the organisation. And our three pillars that we remind ourselves of quite regularly internally is the value of education. Probably the most valuable investment that somebody can make is education. The fact that financial services can be delivered so much better. And then Dave touched on the point that technology shouldn't replace people. Technology should facilitate and enhance better human connections. And we have a unique solution that is unapologetically human-heavy. And our largest part of our organisation is our family support team, made up of some wonderful humans. Well, Edstart really can be summarised as being an organisation that has a unique combination of technology and family care, and that's allowed us to be quite successful. We've got over 700 schools that we work with across the country, over 2 billion in payment plans. I think we have around about 100,000 families now, all across Australia. And I think as well as the scale, we also have a real depth and breadth of experience across a whole variety of schools. We have some small, there's a Christian school in Goondiwindi, Border Rivers. I think they've got maybe 50 people, and then we work with the large grammar schools across the country, some of the biggest and most expensive schools, regional, city, all across all sorts of denominations. So it's given us a real breadth and depth of experience. The economic context. There's been a lot in the news recently, but also a conference that I attended over the last couple of days. There was lots of chatter about the recent budget, cost of living, unsurprisingly. There was a presentation from Commonwealth Bank, which ended up being quite contentious. It was the presentation that had by far the most questions being asked. And it did appear, at least from my perspective and a few others, that they were trying to, as best they could, uplift the current pretty low consumer sentiment, because it was a almost unrealistically optimistic outlook, given a lot of the data that we have access to, and then also what we're seeing anecdotally. So almost as a bit of a counter to some of what I think might be a bit of a bank-led optimistic narrative, I wanted to share some of what we are seeing internally day to day. So just some of the things we've been seeing in the news. Inflation is expected to be above 2 to 3% for a while longer, and this was the commentary in February. And then inflation looks on track to peak near 5% year on year in Q2 and will remain highly sensitive to fuel prices. Another March comment, the direct effect via petrol prices of oil prices remaining around $100 per barrel would on its own lift headline inflation in Australia to around 5% over the year to the June quarter. And then most recently, under CBA's central oil price scenario, headline inflation is now expected to rise to around 5.4% by mid-2026, a figure significantly higher than earlier forecast. And then in our most recent economic update that our CEO, Jack, gave towards the end of last month, they just announced that CPI was running at 4.6%. And just as by way of comparison, it was 3.7% in February, 4.6% in March. And then across the year, the same time last year, 2.4% up to 4.6%. But and by the way, I'm just going to skip through these because the economic update took half an hour on its own, but I just wanted to try and pull out some figures that I thought you might find interesting, and also trying to make it a bit more relevant to non-government Christian family schools as close as I could. So headline CPI and secondary school fees, I think this is quite important that, headline CPI, we can often get focused on CPI and some broad figures that come from the central bank, from ABS, but secondary school inflation price increases were 6.4% over the year, and CPI running at 4.6% now in March of 2026. Secondary schools nudged up a little bit to 6.6%. And the latest inflation data, there were just a few things I wanted to mention. So housing, transport, and education. Hopefully you can see those figures from where you're sitting. But obviously your exposure to these areas, depending on your family makeup and your circumstances, means that again those average figures are not as meaningful. Comparisons from one family to the next. And again, this is just comparing March 2025 to March 2026 across those areas. And again, just highlighting housing, transport. Interestingly, education has come off a little bit, but obviously in no way compensates for the increases in other areas. So the key drivers of the interest rate: transport, housing, and education. And just a little table here of what's been happening with prices. Diesel hasn't come off and hasn't decreased as much as petrol has. So again, depending on your exposure to diesel as an organisation or an individual, this will be making a much bigger impact on your expenses. And then trying to make this make sense at a household level. A single car household annual costs we just looked at. Typically, the fact that it's come off a little bit since the peak in March still means that it's around $600 more in fuel than in 2024 for diesel-exposed families that are paying, and they're paying more still. Global fuel prices, automotive fuel CPI, one of the biggest impacts, up around 24%. And then having a look at housing, probably the standout was electricity, and just worth knowing that actually hasn't been an increase in the electricity prices. It's just the coming off of the reducing of the rebate from the government, but that's had the effect of electricity inflation being up around 25%, and that's just the index over period. And just making the point that the rebates have worn off. When it comes to education, this is from Edstart's fees reports. On the table, I just put a couple of reports, by the way. There's the last year's insights report that comes from our survey, and then another report that we put out every year is the fees report, and this is the data from that. So this is the amount that school fees have gone up across, and this is Australia-wide in this case. So again, just making the point that there's CPI and inflation generally, but then there's the actual costs. Did you have a question, Roger?
Yeah, I'm just wondering why we're 6% for the last couple of years when wages at schools, which is 70% or thereabouts, including super, of our costs are only been going up by about maybe 3.5. It does seem that schools are skimming a lot more than their costs are going up. I don't know if that's... I can't see how expenses are up by 6% when wages are your main costs and you're not paying 6% on wage increases. So, I don't know, I'm not a business manager anymore, but it just seems a little strange. But I'm not disagreeing with your figures. I'm saying more likely schools are skimming more than the increase in costs. Does anyone argue with that? Or is that what the cost of education has been?
Yeah, well, there are a couple of points that I would make. One is that over time, and I think that's on one of these next coming slides, is the staff to student ratio has just continued to come down over time. But I think also any schools that have had any capital works costs, just the cost of construction and project management has just escalated.
Costs are up by 6%. I agree with that.
So anecdotally. So contrary probably to your instinct, Roger, anecdotally, schools are actually typically realising that probably the fee increase needs to be about something like 8%, but they just don't think that's tenable, and they're increasing by 6%. So actually, on the contrary, schools are actually still in catch-up mode. And I think the point will be made here that in all likelihood, fees will have to go up by even more next year in response to some of these economic pressures.
Construction costs.
I think the margin's been getting squeezed for many years, and now schools can't get that margin back because it is too much. And at the Gold
But you know
Coast,
what I'm saying? We're not paying 6% increase in wages.
You'll pay more than 3 though, because
maybe
you
3.5.
get ban and step increases.
Well,
and
yeah.
super, so that's all been
Super's
added
gone up a
to
little
it.
bit.
But that's all of the country, and I would say the fees have been, the wages have been going up in some of those bigger grammar type schools or those bigger schools. On the Gold Coast, I reckon more than that.
Okay.
But they are, they're charging 7%.
Yeah.
And they can't charge any more, but they're losing margin. They're literally losing money, some of those schools now, we're getting told.
We'll keep coming back to the centre. I'm just conscious as well, we're recording it and none of this can be heard on the recording. So we might need to restate a few bits here and there, but keep going.
Okay, no, good point. And then just overlaying inflation, just interesting to see how inflation has been running, alongside average fee increases, and they're likely that's where inflation is likely to jump now. And then the drivers of that inflation: wage increases, growth in staff, and government funding. So in a lot of cases, I guess that's the other point, is government funding has been reducing in some of those larger schools. Their DMI, they're actually getting less and less funding, so they're having to try and compensate for that. Some of them also lagged behind in the increases they probably needed around COVID time. They held back a little bit on fee increases, so this has been a little bit of a catch-up after that. The student to staff ratio that I mentioned, so just over time that's been coming down, and I guess that again puts some pressure on prices. And then enrolment growth versus staff growth. So staff growth, because of that ratio, has been running ahead of enrolment growth. So how does this play through the economy into homes? So this is what we try to do, rather than just having this fairly blunt number of 4.6%. We try to have a look at our data to see how that flows through, and it's very difficult to create a model for a typical family. But as much as possible, we do that just to try and bring this to life. And we're looking at things like wages, so wage price index growth. You can see that's come off, and the Reserve Bank forecast for wage growth and inflation. So the blue line is the consumer price index coming down, and wage price slightly on its way down as well. The RBA's own forecast for real wages to keep falling until mid-2027. Families face another 18 months of decline before any relief is the suggestion. And then the cash rate. I would say that's one of the biggest stories in town, and I think that speaks for itself, because that's, I guess, where everything flows through from. And the outlook from some of the banks, 4.6 hold, and 4.85, but at least one increase probably expected. And then consumer confidence, I suppose this flows through to our families as well, at an almost all-time low. In fact, actually one of the measures, the ANZ measure, does have it as at an all-time low, consumer confidence, and of course that then flows through to consumption. So the typical family that I was talking about, if we just take a couple with 2 children and a 200K household gross income, and of course that's just one example, but this is what the data, this is what the data tells us. So this is our internal modelling, and so they might be spending around $60,000 on housing. That's gone up nearly 10%. School fees, that's gone up 6.6 as we looked at earlier. Their general expenses have gone up at least 5.4%. And the surplus, you can see, has come down dramatically. So that last year when we did the same modelling, that surplus was $6,600. And there's perhaps an interest rate increase likely, and maybe 2. And that means that all of the relief that was in place in 2025 has pretty much been neutralised. And just how that pans out is at about $5,500 extra per year compared to 12 months ago. And then this was just one of the graphs I pulled out. Same house, same school, same car. So these people that have done nothing different, they've still got the same home, mortgage. The kids are at the same school and they've got the same car, but they're actually spending $10,000 more to keep those. So that's just a real example of how that flows through to families. So that's the reality. Is when we look at a figure of 4.6%, it's actually more like an experienced increase of 7.3%. And then just a few more slides on what we're experiencing internally. So last year, for the whole of last year, by the time we got to the end of the year, we looked at how many families of all of our families had missed a payment, and actually I think this is the other way around, sorry, and 13%, just over 13% had missed a payment at some point in the year. And now, already in May, we've had 14% of families miss a payment. So that's ticking up, and that number is just going to continue to go up. So that's not forecast. That's what's happening right now. And 13% of families who missed a payment, 13% of families have missed a payment this year of families who missed no payments last year. And then there have been a lot of changes. I don't think I've got this slide, but there's also a slide, I think, around. I think about 17% of families have changed from monthly payers to fortnightly or weekly payers as well. So they've increased the frequency of payments to just try and spread that.
And I've read.
Oh, was that in there? Okay. Oh, there it is. And then revenue optimization. My intention here, actually, and we've saved a bit of time. The exercise we did earlier at the surplus table pretty much was covering this, but I was just going to suggest maybe we have a little bit of a discussion on broadening the revenue base and doing that, leveraging physical assets, ancillary services like education. Some schools have actually been used as a film location. There's a couple of schools I know that have got some extra parking, and they make some revenue from sporting events with their parking. And then things like transport, stationery, uniforms, fundraising, school fees. So I think we've covered that off enough in that previous exercise, but that was going to be a part of the sort of interactive discussion. And then revenue optimization through school fees. So I guess this is the area that we then interact with directly. Obviously, increasing enrolments, importantly not just in number but in profile, trying to be selective about enrolments. Fee setting, and again, I was going to touch on a few tools, education infographics with their demographics, for example. Data, a lot of Edstart reports are used, and we try and make sure that those come out at the time of the year that people are sitting down, putting their budgets together for the next year, setting their fees for the next year. So I guess just an encouragement to use the increasing amount of data. John Somerset, who I speak to, I was chatting to John yesterday. He talks about price elasticity and becoming a little bit more sophisticated, like some of the US schools do, on being just a lot more, I guess, honed in on price setting and the different ways that can come together. So that's a little passion project of his at the moment. Fee collection, how effective, so what is our collection rate by the end of the year, and importantly, what is it taking to get there? So the efficacy and efficiency of fee collection. Just made a note that importantly that must not be at the expense of the experience. So the experience for both the family and the school, if something's going to change, it needs to be a more positive experience at the same time as that efficacy and efficiency. And then just the world of concessions is something that was spoken of quite a lot over the last couple of days at the REA conference, just how those are being optimised. The combination of not so much scholarships but needs-based bursaries, and how we're helping some schools to manage that a little better. Okay, and then just a note about actually managing instalment payers in particular, so families that are paying weekly, fortnightly, monthly, so not your regular annual or semesterly or termly payers, but specifically instalment payers. Some schools don't actually offer those options, but that's becoming pretty rare. A lot of schools are still using direct debit forms and doing their own thing through their bank. The remainder have developed some sort of, or have implemented some sort of either technology solution or in Edstart's case, technology plus people. And that's really because the schools are looking to provide more flexibility in fees. They want to also maintain a strong fee collection. Well, if you want both of those things, then normally there's going to be an increase in resource, an increase in administration. And I guess the question is, where is that best place? Is that internal or external? Because the list of tasks that come with managing that is pretty extensive, but I'm sure you will all be aware of that. And then there's some hidden implications, of course, in addition to that workload, staff stress and turnover, data security is becoming increasingly important, the impact, the experience that I've already mentioned, etc. So then, for those of you that are not aware, I just wanted to mention, if you ever hear organisations talk about Edstart, they're probably talking about our most popular service called Plus. I think about 95% of our families are now Plus families, and that's a solution where the school uploads their statements for their Edstart portion of their families up to the portal, and we just pay the school based on those invoices. We commit to the entire term and pay on monthly instalments. So that's a very neat part of that side of the portal, if you like, simple upload of invoices and being paid. And on the other side is really what we're all about, and that's just how effectively we look after families who set up their own payment plans and who get looked after by our family support team. So that's the unique Edstart formula of both technology and humans. And just some of our family support team that make all that happen. And really this just sets out, I guess, the difference between trying to get there with just technology and hoping that is going to be enough. And if there's a missed payment, this is just example, I guess, of one scenario. If there's a missed payment, it pretty quickly falls to the school to manage. But when you have the Edstart solution, there's this layer of Edstart Plus, which means that in the same scenario, if a payment fails for whatever reason, there is a whole suite of both technology, automation, but most importantly, a group of humans taking responsibility for the success of it, and that's prevents it having to get to the school. I won't, just in the interest of time, I won't go into this, and these slides will be shared, but I just thought you might be interested when it comes to assessing if a school has partnered with Edstart Plus. We're then asking them afterwards to review, and we do surveys, and we're asking them questions about their administration reduction, their ability to focus on other initiatives. So this is, for your information, how they are tracking the success or not of the Edstart relationship. And again, what's so, I guess, rewarding for us is that we're able to, in every single case, we're able to help schools across a range of pre-agreed KPIs or ROI measures to make sure that we are affecting things like collections and reducing concessions and reducing debtors, but we're not doing it at the cost of family relations. And on the contrary, we have a uniquely very, very happy group of families. So that's I guess a very important part of that measure. And that comes through in both our family surveys, but also from feedback from the schools. And then I just wanted to touch on this. So this is, I mentioned the assessment and ROI. So when schools are considering partnering with Edstart, but also when they're looking back over that decision, maybe 6 months or a year later, up front, the sort of thing we're asking schools is we try and get an understanding of the current payment ratios, how are families paying in what ways, and then we're asking them questions like levels of concession and bursary, a sense of how many of their enrolments may be at risk for financial reasons. might that be 0.5% or 1%? And we ask these questions, and the last one is a question on the administration time that it's taking to get there. And then we put that into a spreadsheet, which is the annual billings, the government grants, the number of students, the families, and we're putting that data in so that it becomes a very bespoke calculator. And then we run through things like how those numbers then flow through in terms of the cost of administration benefit, current bad debt, fee concessions, lost enrolments. And right at the bottom, in this particular example, we then show what the Edstart fee would be if we were looking after all of those instalment plans for the family, so that on the summary page, we can then have, and I'll just quickly talk through the columns, the current scenario would be their current cost of doing it themselves. With Edstart Plus, we're saying the cost would then drop to the Edstart Plus column. And then that's just a simple subtraction to work out the benefits. And we're saying over on the right-hand side, we're saying this, let's just assume for now, let's model that we're going to make an 80% difference in administration. So we're going to drop administration by 80%. We're going to reduce bad debt by 20%. Fee concessions will reduce by 30%. And lost enrolments there'll be 20% fewer lost enrolments for financial reasons. And the idea is this is workshopped, and we sit with the prospective team and look at these numbers, and they might say, you know what, we think that's probably going to be more like 10% for this reason, or actually we can probably put that up to 30%. So together we do a little what-if sort of session, and in this particular case, we've just got the difference between the benefits that we've projected, less the Edstart fee and an annual return on investment. So I just wanted to give you a flavour for that being a part of course, it isn't just about the numbers, because there's other reasons why you would want to partner with a third party, but it's just helpful sometimes for them to prosecute the argument internally from a business case perspective, and then to come back and look at that. And then this, my colleague who I was with yesterday from Western Australia, he just shared this with me. So one of the business managers, I think this might be one of our oldest Plus partners, and he had just been talking about the growth of the school, and actually one of the reasons for partnering with us in 2021 was to try and future-proof what was going to be quite substantial growth. And over that growth, these numbers have still then flowed through. So the total debtors the total debtors is really their revenue, so their billings, if you like, and then the outstanding debtors have just continued to come down every year as a percentage. They're writing off less and less bad debt really over time, and the provision for debt has come down. So this is the sort of thing that we ask business managers to track once they've partnered with us, just so that they and us can get an idea of how things have gone.
Very good.
And sorry, in the interest of time, I skipped through that very quickly, but hopefully that's just sown a few ideas.
Stick around though, because I think let's take 5 minutes. I'm happy to push lunch back a bit, because I want to make sure you get the solid half an hour for that. That's really helpful. I am conscious again for the recording, that they can't hear questions, so we might need to restate them.
Okay, no problem.
But I think it'd be good to press into this a little bit. And I was interested, just reflecting on what you've been sharing in light of the parable we shared at the start of the day of writing down some of the debts with people. I was just saying on one of the tables that it's a minor interpretation, but a number of scholars have said that he may well have been able to write down the debts because he took out his own commission. It was an interesting reflection on the passage that some have said may or may not be the case. It's a minority reading, but that does raise an interesting point about how could you seek relational outcomes that actually get what was an outstanding debt to be repaid quickly, because it's done in a way that actually is mutually beneficial. And this seems to me to be a great example of that. Were there any questions or comments, whether it was about the forecast for Consumer Price Index or any of those things, or just things that we want to talk about as a group? What we might do, I might grab the microphone there.
Walk around with this.
Just hold it, and I can carry it around if there's a question. That way we can hear it, and I'll bring it back to you. Does anyone wanted to raise anything, ask anything, share anything? If so, that's great. If not, we'll just give a couple of minutes for it, and then we'll go for lunch. Yeah, any questions or comments?
Just an excellent presentation.
Oh, thank you. Sorry,
Confirmed, Roger?
That was Roger saying it was an excellent presentation.
Yes, thank you. We concur. Anyone else want to share something, or... I mean, it can also be a helpful space. I mean, if you're not, again, no one's compelled to do anything, but just in that space of debt collection, what are you experiencing in your context, and what have you found helpful? Because we've all got our own internal systems, I'm sure. There might be some wisdom in the room just to talk about how you manage that, and it probably concurs with the kind of things that Ed started doing. Yeah, anyone want to share how you're approaching that? Yeah, thanks, Phil.
Bruce, obviously the majority of that's going to be K to 12. Does that also work at the other income streams, USH, daycare?
Yes, we have. Thank you. We have.
We had manual processes and really staff heavy, so we had 7 FTE in the finance department. So it was part of my negotiating with the finance department to decrease the FTE. We decided to use Edstart, and our experience has been they're a super smooth organisation in terms of onboarding with us. They're excellent. All the feedback from families is the onboarding is super simple, and effectively Edstart guarantee your term fees up front. So we offer a 10% discount to families that pay up front, but we're only paying 2.6% to Edstart. So it's better for us to get everyone on Edstart rather than actually giving that discount. And as some saving, because we give staff 20%, we tell staff they have to they can't use Edstart, they have to pay through the payroll. But yeah, really good experience.
Last one, then we got lunch. Thanks, Phil.
Do you offer help in setting fees, communicating those changes?
Sorry, was that setting fees and communication? Yes, yes, and really that's it's not because we have particularly any sort of marketing or communication expertise in house that would be any better, but just from accumulated knowledge from other schools, we've seen how it's done. So not just when we've been involved. Quite often, schools will actually launch the idea of Edstart at the same time as the fee increases for next year. It's part of the communication of saying, look, we are putting fees up. Here's some of the justification, but by the way, it's also going to be easier to pay. There's going to be a lot more flexibility. You've now got this very user-friendly platform, so we're included in that communication. But we have a suite of information that we've got, or communication examples that we've accumulated over years to say, here are a few templates that you might want to use. Because on that particular point of communicating fees, we found that a lot of the time it's oversimplified. So some person in the board perhaps might even just put a little letter together of justification, and it sounds quite defensive. Whereas if it's actually the marketing department that's involved in it, they can actually much more preemptively through the year start to remind families of the value, so that you're not just, as I say, in a very reactive fashion announcing fees with an excuse, a fee increase. It's actually a more marketing-driven project of communication. Yeah.